Founded in 1879, Aspen, Colorado has been in its time a mining camp, a boom town, a remote and serene small town, and one of America's largest and most renowned resort towns. Today, Aspen demonstrates some aspects of the American dream. It also demonstrates aspects of the American nightmare. It embodies the only true American constant, contradiction. Aspen is still trying to resolve the central American question. What is the true relationship between man and the land? How we use the land describes us, defines our priorities, determines how we shall live. But the relationship between man and the land has remained in flux in colonial America as well as in modern Aspen. Philosopher John Locke.
Government has no other end but the preservation of property.
Thomas Jefferson.
The care of human life and happiness, and not their destruction, is the first and only legitimate object of good government.
John Jay.
The people who own the country ought to govern it.
Supreme Court Justice William O. Douglas.
The concept of public welfare is broad and inclusive. The values it represents are spiritual as well as physical, aesthetic as well as monetary. It is within the power of the legislature to determine that the community should be beautiful as well as healthy, spacious as well as clean, well-balanced as well as carefully patrolled.
Naturalist Aldo Leopold.
We abuse the land because we regard it as a commodity belonging to us. When we see the land as a community to which we belong, we may begin to use it with love and respect.
Novelist Willa Cather.
The land belongs to the people who love and understand it.
Sociologist Philip Slater.
The American imagines himself to be alone on the continent.
Journalist Horace Greeley.
Land is a mere merchandise like molasses and mackerel.
Man, the land, government. They are the central elements in the unending land use debate. Thomas Jefferson.
The natural process of things is for liberty to yield and the government to gain ground.
In Aspen, as in most other towns, shifting currents of self-interest, consensus, social compacts, economic drives, dreams, accidents, and planning have shaped the townscape. Aristotle.
The ideal state is one whose entire territory can be surveyed from a hilltop.
The thing is, we do not know what we want. We want everything. Beauty and efficiency. Profit and pleasure. Freedom and community. Purity and squalor. Everything. And our townscapes reflect our contradictory nature, our confusion, our conflicts. Like every American town, Aspen contains portions of ugliness and portions of beauty. Economics and aesthetics frequently collide. Order and confusion coexist rudely. You are about to see Aspen in a new way. First, some aspects of the nightmare, then some aspects of the dream. By examining the parts, perhaps we can better understand the whole, can clarify our own views, can identify environmental assets and liabilities, and pinpoint accomplishments and failures, can begin to see that the way we use the land, more than anything else, determines the way we live today and the way we will live tomorrow. Aspen as nightmare, Aspen as dream. The images are specific, but the conflicts, The implications, the questions apply to every town. Until we begin asking the right questions, we cannot possibly find the right answers. After 50 years of hard times that followed the end of the silver boom, Aspen was ready for some good news. It came in 1945 when Chicago businessman Walter Pepke, veterans of the Army's 10th Mountain Division, and some Aspen civic leaders set about, with generous infusions of money from Denver, Chicago, and New York, to turn the once rich mining town into a ski and culture capital. The town began to grow. Through the 1950s, growth was slow, measured, almost subtle. In the early 1960s, it accelerated sharply. For the last 10 years, growth has worked like a riptide in Aspen, altering people, the landscape, attitudes and ways of life in casual and crucial ways. In 1971, there were 5 million skiers in America. Today, there are 10 million. In a normal winter, the United States Forest Service clocks about 1.3 million skier days on Aspen slopes. Between 1969 and 1977, Pitkin County population has tripled. Remote, ringed with mountains, Aspen in season has the highest population density of any city or town in Colorado. It also has the highest cost of living of any city in the continental United States. Retail sales were 40 million in 1970, 91 million in 1975. Aspen is rural in a back-to-the-soil era, a sports capital in a sports-crazy decade, a celebrated watering hole in an age of celebrity. There are twice as many tourist beds as resident beds in Aspen. It is one of the fastest-growing towns in one of the fastest-growing states in the fastest-growing region in the nation. Willard Clapper,
An enormous
Jr.
amount of changes. I grew up here, and growing up here, this is an ideal place to grow up. You know, you start out with all sorts of natural surroundings, which are nice. You have an incredible intellectual attitude that was here when I was a kid. And, you know, it's not that it's suddenly come into Aspen that you have this cultural type thing. It's been here all the time. You had, you know, everybody makes comments about taxi drivers who have PhDs and that sort of thing. But we had taxi drivers with PhDs then, too, back in whatever it was, you know, 58, 59, 60, all through there. Things have, well, at that time, you know, one thing that was nice was that I could just about go anywhere I wanted and do anything I wanted. And I would have no fear of running into certain numbers of people or people that I had troubles with or anything. You know, it was totally open and free, not only in the outdoors, but around town. You know, we used to play things like bicycle tag, and we'd carry our bikes through, you know, what was Matthew Drugs, which is now Carl's. Or
The sense of community and of place, the common vision that used to exist in Aspen has been fragmented in the boom.
to own something. And to own something in Aspen is really difficult. It's very difficult. You know, I have friends who've purchased things around town. I have one friend who bought a house for $50,000, and the thing is probably worth $10,000 maximum, and he got a hell of a deal at $50,000. That's bad, you know. And I'm renting a place now, and for now that's fine. You know, I'm not concerned about having children personally, and I'm not concerned about really becoming a permanent part of the community. Because if I can't own anything here, I can't become a permanent part. I just can't. You know, even though I've been here as long as I have, and even though I know as many people as I do, and I know what's going on, I can't do it because I can't afford it.
Architect Ellen Harlan.
Everything else. If you wanted to build a house in Pitkin County today, you would start with the land use code. And that will tell you about setbacks and, you know, your FAR, your floor area ratio, what have you. Then you have the Uniform Building Code that you have to comply with, and this tells you exactly how you can build your house, what kind of materials you have to use, how high the guardrails have to be, what the rise and run on the steps are. There's an amendment to that that tells you about thermal insulation, and you have to comply with that. There's a plumbing code, and there's a national electrical code. There's quite a few words in there, quite a few pages. It's about the same size print as the Denver phone book and a lot thicker. There's the mechanical code. Okay, that's before you even start. And, you know, you look at that, and now they're going to lay a growth management plan on us. There's some more stuff in there that you have to be familiar with. We just have gone through trying to get a grocery store approved out at Snowmass, and it took over 130 meetings with the government officials or their representatives before we got the preliminary approval, which is really incredible. And I wonder if we aren't substituting complexity for sophistication.
Modern Aspen came late to commerce. In the late 1940s and the 1950s, residents hoped merely to make a living, not to make a fortune. But in 1960, skiing boomed. Walter Pepke, who had set the Aspen pace, died. A leading Colorado banking family bought the Pitkin County Bank, and the Aspen Skiing Corporation raised the price of children's lift tickets from 75 cents to $2. It seemed there was money to be made in Aspen. Large tracts of land in and near Aspen were bought by speculators. Large developments were announced. 1963 state enabling legislation made condominiums profitable for both builders and buyers. As much as anything else, the condominium has altered Aspen, dominating the Midtown area, providing ever-increasing first-rate housing for affluent visitors, and crowding out reasonable residential housing. Almost all of the condominiums have been built and are owned by non-residents. Studies done in resort and ski areas in New England show that in those areas, outside ownership of businesses, overextended commercial investments, low productivity, low wages, and irregular employment are the rule. Most full-time jobs, most businesses, and most of the land are held by recent residents or non-residents. And traditional businesses, such as farming and logging, have been crowded out or priced out of the area. Escalating real estate prices and taxes have forced many lifetime residents out. New housing developments tend to push community housing costs ever higher as they draw more people into the area. Finally, a chronic housing crunch develops. The Aspen Skiing Corporation, owned by non-residents, plays a dominant role in shaping Pitkin County. Town and county grow in direct proportion to skiing corporation growth. Every new slope means more visitors, more residents, more lodging, more businesses, and additional city and county costs. Snowmass at Aspen opened in 1967. It was developed by a California company and the Aspen Skiing Corporation. It increased ski slopes in the county by 50%, added 2,000 new tourist beds. That Christmas of 1967, Aspen Skiing Corporation business increased by 46%. In 1968, over $4 million in lots and condominiums at Snowmass at Aspen were sold. The impact of this quantum leap in slopes and accommodations is still being felt. The United States Forest Service owns and supervises 85% of the land in Pitkin County and regulates ski area development throughout the White River National Forest. Until very recently, Forest Service officials saw themselves as partners of ski area operators and endorsed and encouraged continual ski area growth. Several years ago, forester William Lucas said that off-site impact of ski area expansion just wasn't the responsibility of the Forest Service. Under pressure from local and state officials, the Forest Service has now reversed its policy and requires extensive environmental impact studies and approval of local officials before new or expanded ski areas can be approved. But Aspen and Pitkin County residents are still struggling with problems created by ski area growth in the 1960s. Denver real estate man Paul Dawkins.
Hang on to your hat. Land is going to make the gold and silver rushes look like picnics in a park. It would take a complete overturn of the American system to stop it.
Ecologist Ian McHarg.
Colorado is about to be raped. Coming here to speak to you is like coming to see some dying loved one just before he draws the last breath.
The Bible, Book of Genesis.
Be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the fowl of the air and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth.
A town expresses its philosophy, its character, its priorities, its dreams, in the way it uses its land. As the boom gathered momentum, multi-million-dollar land deals were made, unmade, and remade. Large new projects were announced. Whatever land had been, it had become a commodity. Well-located land was money in the bank. By the end of the 1960s, growth and land use were central issues, and the struggle by residents to turn the tide, to regain control of town and county, began in earnest. For the first time, the costs, tangible and intangible, were measured. Denver Research Institute, 1974.
Pitkin County has been in an economic boom since 1968, the year that condominium construction and marketing began to dominate much of the community's development. In that period, Aspen became a boom town. Boom is defined arbitrarily as growth at an annual rate of 8 to 10% or more. From our observations, 5 to 7% is the maximum rate that a small community can comfortably absorb. From 1967 to 1973, the following indicators of growth rate have been above the 10% threshold: skier visits, employment, population growth, construction, number of multifamily housing units, retail sales, real estate values, vehicle registration, vehicles entering the city, government spending, and law enforcement costs. As with most boom communities, this sort of growth presents local governments with more problems in growth management than opportunities for growth exploitation. The three common categories of boomtown problems are degraded quality of life, reduced industrial productivity, and threatened viability of local government.
The Denver Research Institute study outlined the grimmer aspects of boom growth: crowding, dense vehicle traffic, smog, visual pollution, mediocre development and design, steep increase in law enforcement spending, distorted social structure, and the loss of the small-town intimacy and trust that typified Aspen in the 1950s and mid-1960s. The study, noting escalating prices, said the resort activity bids up food and transportation prices. Requirements for public services and facilities may eventually raise local residents' taxes further. While this has been happening, per capita real income in Pitkin County has only been increasing at a nominal rate. Affluence is not universally shared. Rising costs, a decline in the quality of life, an increasingly crowded townscape. These darker aspects of success forced Aspen and Pitkin County residents to reconsider that classic American notion that bigger is better. Studies in Boulder, Colorado, Wayland, Massachusetts, and Palo Alto, California show that unimproved land ultimately costs communities less than residential or commercial development of the land. Colorado Environmental Commission, 1970.
There is no way that the delicate ecological balance of the Roaring Fork Valley can be maintained if all the population projected for the next 20 years is allowed to materialize.
Henry David Thoreau.
A town is not saved more by the righteous men in it than by the woods that surround it.
Naturalist Joseph Wood Crutch.
If we do not permit the earth to produce beauty and joy, it will not in the end produce food either. If we do not value it as beautiful as well as useful, it will ultimately cease to be even useful.
Ecologist Ian McHarg.
The farm is the basic factory. The farmer is the country's best landscape gardener and maintenance workforce, the custodian of much scenic beauty. Mere market values of farmlands do not reflect the long-term value or irreplaceable nature of these living soils.
Ranching has been a principal activity in Pitkin County for more than 90 years. The ranchers, many of whom grew up on the land, have been exemplary stewards of the land. But the ranches and the ranchers may be gone before this decade ends. Stanley Natal.
We used to go to sleep at night and not worry. Now we go to sleep at night with the full knowledge that somewhere there's some group trying to figure out how to acquire our land at no basic cost. That is a terrible thought, but this did not used to exist, and I think now we are never at ease by what something is being done somewhere in a political fashion, local, state, or national, to take away what we have worked for the last 70 years to accumulate. Which is the only thing I have, I can say, is my land. I may be the only one of the very few ranchers in Pitkin County that depend entirely on my ranch income for a living. I have no other income. Probably in the 50s or the middle 50s, we had better times at ranching because every thing we bought was not near as expensive now, and yet what we sold was very similar to today's prices. With the same amount of acreage, basically, the same equipment, basically, everything the same, our taxes have more than doubled now than what they used to be, I would have to say, back in 1950. I firmly believe that there's too many people in the ranching business that are in there strictly for the purpose of losing money. They expect to lose money, and yet we are competing against them to sell on the open market. And what I mean by that is people who have other sources of income, and they just strictly use the agriculture source for a tax deduction for their purposes. And we cannot compete with that when it is our only means of living, and we are trying to make a living with it. This ranch has been in the family since 1904. My father bought it then, and then I bought it from him in 1950. But it was all homesteaded back as early as 1886, I think. And I can say that on the homestead deeds signed at that time, it said to have and to own the land. And now I don't feel like I own it anymore. And yet them were signed by the then President of the United States.
CU Professor Paul Weir.
The beneficial use concept in Colorado water law nowhere considers minimum stream flows as a priority. The law is stuck with a 19th century consumption ethic for dealing with a 21st century conservation problem.
Without a judicious division of available water and a comprehensive state and federal water policy, land use policy in Pitkin County will remain tentative and unfinished. Pitkin County is engaged now in a strenuous battle to keep its fair share of water in the county. In recent summers, the Roaring Fork River, the valley's most precious asset, has sometimes been dry. Naturalist Edward Abbey.
Growth for the sake of growth is the ideology of the cancer cell.
In the winter of 1976-77, a classic American dilemma became the central Aspen dilemma. Boom or bust? A lack of snow, the worst in Aspen's history, held the town well below its normal 90% capacity. Air pollution, congestion, traffic jams were absent. Visitors were able to enjoy the serene and lovely townscape that residents enjoy in the off-seasons. But at the same time, many workers and business people suffered severe financial setbacks. Losses in wages and revenues were thought to be millions of dollars. The cost of living remained high, the housing crunch remained acute, and so the drastic decline in business made a difficult situation worse. It also vividly demonstrated the perils of a one-crop, volatile economy. Like most boom towns, Aspen has relied almost totally on one commodity. As the town grew, it apparently occurred to no one that a foundation of snow might be unreliable. Now that the unthinkable has occurred, millions have been lost, and dreams have turned to nightmares. Some residents are plumping for a more balanced, diversified economy. One fear has emerged. When a town grows beyond a certain point, it can only choose between boom and bust. There seems to be no happy medium. Priest and paleontologist Pierre Teilhard de Chardin.
In every domain, when anything exceeds a certain measurement, it suddenly changes its aspect, condition, or nature. The curve doubles back, the surface contracts to a point. The solid disintegrates, the liquid boils, the germ cell divides. Intuition suddenly bursts on piled up facts. Critical points have been reached.
Aspen, Pitkin County, have been hovering at a critical point for several years. Contradictions, conflicts, confusion dominate. There are as many notions of the dream as there are people. Some residents think of Aspen as a mega resort, a national playground. Others think of it as a small town. Residents are divided over recent efforts by city and county officials to control growth. Some call downzoning unconstitutional. Others feel it has caused land prices to soar and thus turned Aspen into a rich man's enclave. Still others like the notion of tight land use controls, but don't like the attendant bureaucratic red tape. Some feel that individual rights are being undermined. Others claim the public good must prevail. But there doesn't seem to be any agreement on what the public good is. More and more people seem to be concerned about Aspen's image, less and less concerned with its realities. There are theatrical aspects to life in Pitkin County, a staginess, a transitory quality. Wants have been elevated over needs. The pleasure principle seems to prevail at all costs. This dramatic ambience is encouraged by radical weather changes, by an endlessly changing crowd of tourists, and by the annual transformation from ski capital to culture center. Woody Allen.
Not only is there no God, but try getting a plumber on weekends.
More than most towns, Aspen experiences the extremes. When the legendary Dr. Albert Schweitzer came to America, he came straight to Aspen. Aspen was the first mountain town to see its air polluted. Aspen's music festival has an international reputation. Divorce, crime, drug abuse, Other social ills are rising out of proportion, and the press has described Aspen as Sin City. Aspen's beautifully groomed ski slopes are the envy of the ski world. Aspen's après-ski traffic jams enrage even city dwellers. Aspen's idyllic way of life is cherished by many of its residents and visitors. Its inability to achieve any sort of consensus on the central questions, to sort out the contradictions and conflicts, disturbs almost everyone. It is that civic confusion, those contradictions and conflicts, that have done damage to the dream. Novelist Willa Cather.
The Old West had been settled by dreamers, great-hearted adventurers who were unpractical to the point of magnificence. A courteous brotherhood, strong in attack, but weak in defense, who could conquer, but not hold.
And we always have a problem with the crowds, just kind of, moving in on the floats and the procession and everything. So if everybody could move way back, and I know there's a lot of people, it'll make it a lot easier to get through. This is the 26th annual Winter Skull in Aspen. And believe me, after 26 years, Aspen is still crazy after all these years. And beginning the parade, Charlie from Denver.
Walt Whitman.
I can conceive a community today and here in which the perfect personalities without noise meet. Say in some pleasant western settlement or town where a couple of hundred best men and women of ordinary worldly status have by luck been drawn together with nothing extra of genius or wealth, but virtuous, chaste, industrious, cheerful, resolute, friendly, and devout. I can conceive such a community organized in running order, powers judiciously delegated, and then the rest of life, the main thing, freely branching and blossoming in each individual and bearing golden fruit. Perhaps some such community already exists.
From the time that the Utes summered in this valley, from the moment that the first prospector glimpsed the high meadow that was to become Aspen, the place has worked on people in extraordinary ways. Its startling natural beauty encouraged residents to turn the boisterous mining camp into a substantial town. When the silver boom ended, Aspen, unlike most mining towns, survived and became an agricultural community. Though ranching at these altitudes is a chancy business, there are families who have been on the land for all or most of this century. After World War II, Aspen was chosen by Walter Pepke, by skiers, by countless people who were merely passing through and are still here 3 decades later. Today, it is one of those places that everyone wants to see. It has always attracted more than its fair share of the famous, the rich, the powerful, the brilliant, to live or to visit. It has a kind of magic, and that magic is both blessing and bane. Henry David Thoreau.
This curious world which we inhabit is more wonderful than it is convenient, more beautiful than it is useful, more to be admired and enjoyed than used.
Only infrequently is paradise created. Most often it evolves, is the result of some sublime conjunction between weather, geography, and serious people. It cannot be materially improved upon, paradise, but it can be cherished. The trick is not to locate paradise. The trick is to preserve it.
Where's Grandpa? Hi. Is that Grandpa? Oh, come here, Grandpa. Come here, Grandpa.
Have you ever felt a duck's feet? Feel how cold they are.
I'm freezing.
You think your feet are cold.
See the glove?
Feel how cold her feet are.
Many Aspen residents, some lifetime, some long time, some brand new, willingly move to the rhythms of the place and respond to its intimate scale. They feel some kinship with nature, make and sustain connections with it, appreciate its preposterousness, its grand uselessness. They coexist easily with its monuments, its paradoxes, its ironies, laugh at its jokes, neither withdraw before its tantrums, nor succumb. Large portions of Pitkin County remain unencumbered by the burdens of growth and progress, and are now as they have been for generations. One can find nature in all its ages in the county. Primal peaks that survived ancient floods and freezes. Deep and ancient forests that reek of time. Wide, serene meadows that have sustained cattle and sheep and horses for longer than anyone knows. Some valleys in the county demonstrate a simpler, more serene time. The ranches in the county remain open, beautiful for practical reasons. Form follows function. Space, distance, and green are useful, necessary. Serious work goes on there. Egotism, pride, talent. All of these are capable of inspiring handsome vistas and grand works. And of course, paradise can be sustained with money. Some of the county's most elegant precincts demonstrate perfectly the power of money as preservative. Time, money, accident, pragmatism, egotism, pride, talent, respect. These are the traditional sources of beauty in our landscapes, and they work well, perhaps better than any rules and regulations. But in this confined mountain valley, in this boomish climate, social compacts have been used too, as they have been used everywhere that people have gathered in numbers. In the mid-1950s, there were few concrete signs that a boom was on the way. But residents decided to express the community's land use philosophy formally, and a zoning code for Aspen and its immediate environs was written. The code combined the citizens' respect for individual rights and their devotion to the place. It was designed more to preserve than to prevent, and was, in that sense, quite effective. During the same period, some Aspen residents declared war on highway billboards and went out in the night with chainsaws and demolished them. County leaders, acknowledging the guerrillas' fervor, ultimately banned the big signs. By the mid-1960s, it was seen that a more comprehensive land use plan was needed, and a San Francisco planning firm was hired to draw up a master plan. The point of the plan was to preserve the character of the place, the serene way of life, to control growth, and to prevent mindless clutter, commercialization, and environmental spoliation. Thoughtful, reasonable, optimistic. The plan was a genuine reflection of citizens' attitudes and offered a solid frame of reference for future development. By the end of the 1960s, growth was proceeding under its own momentum. The boom was taking over. All the stops were out. Advocates of controlled growth were elected by decisive margins, and land use policy in city and county entered into another phase. County Commissioner Michael Kinsley.
In 1973, over 5,000 units were proposed in Pitkin County. This could have brought as many as 18,000 more people into the valley. In 1974, most of these were stopped by the downzoning. In the Buttermilk area alone, over 600 units were proposed, in addition to a village at the bottom of Tyhack. We can see the site of two of those projects here. One below us would have been the Buttermilk Hilton with 152 units, and then beyond, across the highway, would have been the Broker House Tennis Club with 250 units. The 1974 downzoning only slowed the growth rate to about 7%, and that percentage will double the population in about 10 years. With this in mind, we're now on the verge of implementing a growth management plan, and that plan will slow the growth to about 3.5%. Skyrocketing housing prices are forcing working people out of the valley. With this in mind, we established the Housing Authority. Last year, Jack Jenkins built this 12-unit condominium project, and we marketed it in order to maintain lower prices for working people in the valley. Our new air terminal is the largest solar-heated public building in the country. It's a passive system. It includes louver collectors as well as bead walls, which provide insulation at night and then allow daylight in the daytime. As a result of air pollution, which exceeds federal standards in peak times, and urban-like congestion and noise, we've begun to implement a bus system, and this one primarily goes down valley and to Snowmass Resort. At the same time, we're now developing a transportation alternatives analysis in order to determine the most appropriate long-term transportation solution. As another alternative to our automobiles, and to provide direct access from the urban areas, the urban centers in the county, into the National Forest, we've begun to develop a pedestrian, equestrian, and bicycle trail system.
It is possible to live very well in Pitkin County, to live harmoniously in nature, to participate in the life of the town, to enjoy a variety of cultural, aesthetic, and educational opportunities, and to vigorously exercise and challenge both mind and body daily. Aspen artist Kai Davis.
It's an awfully big country, and it's just bound to affect you. And I really don't miss the city. There are the rivers that I go to, you know. I love it. It's very different than the Chicago area where there were so many artists and so many friends. I feel really rich with friends here. It's just that I've worked more alone here, but I feel it's been very good. I'm not sorry. And it's really worked well with both writing and the art. I'm more focused. I have a chance to really come down in the studio just early and hang right in there. And have some nice friends and some good artist friends too. So I'm not very deprived at all. In fact, not at all.
Sculptress Missy Thorne.
I love to work outside. I mean, that's one of the nicest things about it. You know, you work out and you sort of take a glimpse out of your eye and you're looking at Red Mountain or up at Ajax. I think the pieces that layer themselves come directly from the mountains in the way that if you're particularly in the evening light or afternoon light and you're driving away from the sun and you see these beautiful reflections of one hill going behind another hill, and yet the plane of them all is very flat. You get a sort of read them flat, but the depth is great, and that's what I think those pieces come directly out of that.
Down through history, people have made social compacts in which individual ambitions are tempered to accommodate community goals. English conservative Edmund Burke
Men are qualified for civil liberty in exact proportion to their disposition to put chains on their own appetites. Society cannot exist unless a controlling power upon the will and appetite is placed somewhere, and the less of it there is within, the more there must be of it without. It is ordained in the eternal constitution of things that men of intemperate habits cannot be free. Their passions forge their fetters.
Today, when a town as remote and singular as Aspen is more and more the creature of external pressures, trends, and appetites, citizens are obliged to seek new ideas, new tools, new notions of governance, and perhaps to design new relationships between the individual, the land, and government. Aspen and Pitkin County officials, elected and appointed, have raised fundamental questions, have challenged basic assumptions, have drawn the lightning, and, above all, have made people in the county talk and think about these questions. As order can only proceed out of chaos, this civic commotion may spawn a truly humane environment. Priest and paleontologist Pierre Teilhard de Chardin.
To see or perish is the condition laid on man.
Philosopher Jose Ortega y Gasset.
The choice of a point of view is the initial act of a culture.
Writer William White.
The great task of planning is not to come up with another structure, but to work with the strengths of the structure we have, and to discern this structure as people experience it in their daily life.
Louis Mumford.
The special function of the city is the care and culture of man. The main problems of the city are the problems that have arisen through the neglect of this function for the sake of power or profits, prestige or property.
The Aspen City Council has also been engaged in preserving and refining community assets. Its downzoning program has kept pace with the county's. To preserve the character of the town, the council has established a historic preservation district and improved the look of downtown Aspen by burying all utility lines. Precedents for land use controls extend back through time to ancient Rome's 12 tables, through English law, in our own colonial law. In the 19th and 20th centuries, courts have affirmed and reaffirmed a community's right to legislate for the public good, whether or not it infringes on an individual's rights or reduces the value of privately held property. In 1915, the United States Supreme Court, in upholding a Los Angeles zoning ordinance, said, quote, "There must be progress, and if in its march private interests stand in its way, they must yield to the good of the community," unquote. That notion has been reaffirmed in countless cases around the country and echoed in a recent and celebrated case in which Petaluma, California, won the right, after an extended legal battle, to establish a growth ceiling, a greenbelt marking the outer limits of urban expansion, and an annual growth rate of 6%. The court decision read, in part, quote, "The concept of public welfare is sufficiently broad to uphold Petaluma's desire to preserve its small town character, its open space, and low density of population, and to grow at an orderly and deliberate pace. The concept of public welfare is, in fact, far broader than the right to travel," unquote.
Our property goes all the way down to, this is our fence line right here.
In early 1977, the City County Planning Office presented city and county officials with a proposed growth control plan that would hold growth to a 3.4% annual rate and set construction quotas for each region of the county. Legal precedents for such a plan exist in high court rulings in the Petaluma and other cases, and in Colorado House Bill 1034. It is the purpose of the plan to balance population, housing, environment, skiing facilities, new businesses, jobs, and community facilities. The plan would permit 312 new dwelling units each year.
The reason is that this thing is encroaching.
Whether or not some sort of growth control plan is adopted in Pitkin County, it seems certain that the effort to evolve a functional land use philosophy will go on. Buckminster Fuller.
Problems worthy of attack prove their worth by hitting back.
Biologist René Dubois.
Human beings can profoundly alter the surface of the earth without desecrating it, and they can indeed create new and lasting ecological values by working in collaboration with nature. The earth is to be seen neither as an ecosystem to be preserved unchanged, nor as a quarry to be exploited for selfish and short-range economic reasons, but as a garden to be cultivated for the development of the potentialities of the human adventure. The goal of this relationship is not the maintenance of the status quo, but the emergence of new phenomena and new values.
Ecologist Barry Commoner.
There are 4 laws of ecology. 1, everything is connected to everything else. 2, everything must go somewhere. 3, nature knows best. And 4, there is no such thing as a free lunch.
Buckminster Fuller.
Whenever I draw a circle, I immediately want to step out of it.
Zoning is the traditional means of defining the relationship between man, the land, and government. Growth control is a contemporary means. People in Aspen finding zoning and growth control plans too static, too rigid, too frequently beneficial to the prosperous at the expense of the poor, are exploring other systems, transferable development rights, county purchase of development rights, and a tax system at state and federal levels that would encourage good land use and permit people to stay on the land. They talk of making the neighborhood the primary social unit, of improving and refining the caucus system of decision-making. Land banks or trusts are discussed. The necessity for consensus is noted. One thing is clear. The debate has just begun, and the questions are profound. It is clear now that land is neither a commodity nor a status symbol. It is a finite resource, and our well-being resides in its well-being. Abraham Lincoln.
The dogmas of the quiet past are inadequate to the stormy present. The occasion is piled high with difficulty, and we must rise with the occasion. As our case is new, so we must think anew and act anew. We must disenthrall ourselves, and then we shall save our country.
Very special thanks to the photographers who contributed their stills: Chris Cassette, Sam Enneman, Hal Joe, Judith Hill, Doug Lee, and Andy Stone.